Okay, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you, Eefke, for inviting us. Thank you, Debbie, for moderating. I wonder, how many of you read the newspaper this morning? I don't. How many of you checked your Facebook this morning? How many of you checked your Snapchat this morning? So there are changes. But it's not about these changes, it's about how you are dealing with them. Are you telling your children that they shouldn't be on Snapchat? Are you telling your father, mother, or grandfather that papers are old-fashioned? Are you telling them that some of these tools just shovel garbage to you, that you shouldn't trust them? Or are you telling yourself that you're not looking at some of these at all because of opinions you have about them? Or are you trying to compare and learn and combine, etc.? So a lot of these things are changing, and the same is, of course, happening in scholarly communication. Does this work? Yes. Perhaps you've seen this before. These are 101 innovations, innovative tools that have been introduced since about 2000, up to last year. We don't update this anymore, though we do have a full database of these tools available that's linked in our presentation. And there are many more of these. These are just 101 of these tools. By the way, our full presentation, our full presentation is available online right now. You can download that by using the URL over there, tinyurl.com, STM Innovations 101. But don't do that all together at the same time. Otherwise, probably at Fixia, they will think there's a kind of denial of service attack. And they don't have alarm bells going on. We heard that. But you can do that and watch for yourselves on your own device. So there are a lot of innovation, but the big question is, how do researchers, how do students, how do professors deal with that? How to choose from this? They are confronted with so many possibilities. We already have over 5,000 publishers with all their platforms, and there are a lot of new tools as well. So how to choose from that? What do they use in their full workflow? If you go and look at this workflow, what do they use for discovery, for analysis, for writing, for publication, for outreach, and for assessment? Would this be an option? So this is ResearchGate, one of the big academic social networks. There are many, not just 3, there are many, but we will focus on some of the bigger ones today. And would this be really an option for people? Well, you can use some of the ResearchGate functionality in these phases, although you see some blank areas here as well. This is another one. This is the Elsevier ecosystem. And you do see that a tool that was considered a small Web.0 tool years ago, Mendeley, is now fully mainstream, part of a big legacy publisher, and is really seen as a kind of strategic tool to support research in the full workflow in many phases. And of course, Mendeley is still expanding and introducing new possibilities. But it's part of a bigger ecosystem of this publisher. And you can make these pictures for some of the other big publishers, Springer Nature, etc., as well. Of course, you could also make something like this for Google or for Wikimedia or any other one. So the question is, these tools, these academic social networks, what use are they? What functions do they have? And we can look at what's happening within the research cycle. There are many disruptions going on, there are changes, and some of these changes are supported, for instance, by these 3 tools. These make it possible to do some of the things in different phases than you did before, or in a different way that you did before, or doing it yourself instead of some supplier or publisher or library. In that sense, these are 2.0 tools. But the question is, if you look in more detail, what use are these 3 academic social networks? Well, this is a lot more detail already. What we define in all our research that we do under the heading of 101 Innovations is these 30 activities throughout the research cycle. And we have depicted here the activities that these 3 tools do support. And you see that especially there are some phases in this cycle, especially analysis and writing, that they don't support at all. Well, of course, there's a big exception. Mendeley started as a reference manager, so they do support full reference management and citing, of course. But the other ones don't do that much in analysis and writing, and also not that much in preparation phase. They do support a lot of things that researchers need to do regarding search, discovery of material. They do support, to some extent, sharing. Of course, in ResearchGate and academia, there's a lot of sharing, whether you like it or not, of all kinds of research output, whether it's data presentations, posters, or papers. And most of these tools do support things that have to do with outreach, researcher profiling, assessment of research objects, assessment of researchers with all kind of metrics, but also with comments and with a possibility to do peer review on any work in progress or on any final, whatever is ever final publication. If you look into even a little bit more detail, and it's the other button, and we did that, you can see that there are a lot of interesting patterns. What we did here is look at quite a granular level at some 170 functions that we defined for these 3 tools together. And we made some nice Venn or Euler diagrams of these. So for these different phases, you can see here, out of that 170, what is the distribution of those over ResearchGate, Mendeley, and academia. And actually see, if you, for all of these together in the middle, you see that the section that is common to those 3 is actually, it's only 10%. It's only 17 of those 170. So for all the 153 other functions, one of these is lacking it. So you shouldn't say, well, that's academic social networks, that's my opinion about them, and it's true for every one of these. No, these are really different things, different tools, developing in different directions with different views, different communities, different technologies, and different goals, perhaps even. And here you can see, and we do have this also online, so you can check all these details. There is some arbitrariness, of course, in defining all these functions, what really is a separate function. But we have tried to avoid most of these problems by being as granular as possible. And you do see again that there are big differences in what these tools support. For instance, if you look at assessment, ResearchGate is doing a lot there, and academia a little bit less. And it's interesting that if you dive into academia, you find discussions on new functionality that the system wants to add. For instance, discuss papers and upvote papers. And there you see that the academia community is reacting quite defensively, and they're saying, well, we don't want all these bells and whistles that ResearchGate has. We don't like that. Of course, this is only a few people, only some 30 people that have reacted out of the supposedly 30 or 40 million people that have an account on academia. But these are really different tools. Although they share the idea that you support what researchers want in their full workflow. If you look at just some big examples of unique functionality, things that the other ones don't do. For instance, in academia, it's the possibility to do publication sessions, to say, I want for a limited period of time to have your feedback on this paper. Let's talk about this paper in a group. On Mendeley, of course, you have very detailed search for jobs. Of course, you have Mendeley data, moving towards FAIR, adopting FAIR. You have, of course, full reference management in Mendeley. ResearchGate is, of these three, the one that has the most elaborate functions. I'm not saying yet that all these functions are being used intensively by all people that have an account on ResearchGate. But they do have the possibility to describe projects, to describe works in progress. They do have full Q&A, and that is really used. You can search on ResearchGate for almost anything that researchers do and find many, many dozens, hundreds, sometimes thousands of questions being discussed there. By the way, if you dive in, you also see that what happens there is a big shout out from the global south to be taken seriously in the game that is called science. What also ResearchGate has is, of course, adding all kinds of resources to publication, all kinds of advanced possibilities to do full text viewing and annotating, and seeing figures and data separately, etc. And it does have institutional, although probably not very reliable, institutional profiles with all kinds of statistics at that level. There's also missing functionality. I won't go through all of these separately. But most of these are functionalities that really connect these, or should connect these platforms with other tools and services out there. So ResearchGate in academia especially, they are lacking integration with ORCID. They are lacking third-party metrics. They are lacking clickable DOIs. They do not automatically link to research object versions at the initial publication platforms, trying to avoid the version of record term here. And they do have full reference, they lack full reference management capability. If we go on, you can also look at it from the other side and say, well, if you look at what people do, not at how these tools should connect, but at what people do and the phases these tools are active in. There's some functionality perhaps up for grabs for these tools. With limited investment, they could make it possible to share and archive notebooks, workflows and protocols. Or they could provide, and that's very interesting, online text mining, because they do have the full text, especially ResearchGate in academia, full text from many different publishers. So people should be able to mine and do analysis on groups of full text. That would be interesting and really of value added for researchers, if they can do it reliably, of course. Collaborative writing is another thing that they could easily add to that. And I've been talking about what is possible or what could be possible. But the big question is, of course, are these researchers actually using all these tools? And for that, I hand over to my colleague, Bianca Kramer.
Thank you. Yes, and I'll tell you a little bit more about the survey that we did last year, asking researchers and other people involved in scholarly communications, librarians, publishers, anyone, about the tools they use, not just for the academic social networks, but across the whole research workflow. So we asked for 17 different research activities, what tools do you use? We presented some as preset options to sort of get people thinking, but we also encouraged people to add any other tools that they might use. Oh, this one. To try to get as broad a response as possible, we did not only put this out through social media and through the net, because then you get a really biased response. We really tried to reach as broad an audience as possible. And one of the ways we did that was by partnering with distribution partners, university, a lot of publishers, many of you are in this room, that helped us distribute the survey among their user base, among their author base. And that's how we got over 20,000 responses. I'll show you a bit more about the demographic breakdown in a minute. We made all our data from this survey, we made publicly available. We published them as an open data set on Zenodo. We published a data publication describing the methodology and the structure of the data in F1000 Research. And we provided a dashboard that you can use to just have a quick look at the most important results per research activity. And for people who are more inclined to write their own scripts to analyze these data, we also put them on Kaggle, which is a platform where you can not only download the data, but also upload your scripts and run those scripts in the browser and also share those with others. We did all this because we believe in open, but we also did this because we can do our own analysis. We are doing our own analysis, but our questions are not necessarily the questions that you might find important. So we really want to encourage anyone to use these data to get any question that you have answered. And today we'll show a little bit about our results for academic social networks. So 20,000 respondents, over 20,000. Who were these people? We had a pretty good breakdown across disciplines, life sciences, physical sciences, social sciences. The only really small segment was law, but all the others, I think, are pretty well represented. Looking at research roles, about 75%, three-quarters were researchers, PhD students, postdocs, or faculty. We also had bachelor, master students, librarians, publishers in the mix. And we didn't want to ask about age, but we did want to be able to distinguish between in career length. So we asked about data for your first publication. And there's a pretty even breakdown of early career researchers and more established career researchers. And all the data are you're able to break them down across all these different demographic variables. We also try to get a global representation. Of course, it's always easier to get responses from the Anglo-Saxon world, and we did have a majority of responses from those areas. But we distributed the survey in 7 world languages, went through some extra trouble to try and encourage uptake of the survey in different global regions. And it's not an even distribution, but we got responses from, I think, about over 150 different countries. So having said that, how about these academic social networks? What are people actually using? Looking at the question about researcher profiles, asking, which researcher profiles do you use? These were the 7 options that we presented as preset options. And of course, people also massively answered any other things they use, which was really good. But of these 7, ResearchGate really comes out on top. With Google Scholar Citations followed, and ORCID as a good third, which we felt was really encouraging to see. But ResearchGate really most popular, if you can say that. This is overall, for all researchers. If you break that down across disciplines and compare ResearchGate versus academia, it's not quite, it's in line with other things, other research in this area, that ResearchGate is very much more popular than academia in the more hard sciences, while academia is used more than ResearchGate by people in arts and humanities. And it's more or less equal for social sciences and economics. Remember, this is only for who use it as a researcher profile. Jeroen already showed that there are a lot of functionalities in these tools, and we asked about some of them. We asked about the use for multiple activities. We had 4 questions for ResearchGate where we specifically asked if people used ResearchGate for any of these activities. The researcher profiles, already showed you that. Getting access to literature, to data. Archive and share your own publications. And getting alerts and recommendations on what to read. And when you rank them on what's it used most for, then as a researcher profile, most people indicate they use ResearchGate for that, followed by getting access and archiving and sharing your own publications. But the difference is really not that big. I think the biggest take-home message from that is that people use ResearchGate for a lot of different activities. In this figure is also the breakdown for the research roles, for the careers. And you see that the group that with the highest percentage of ResearchGate use for all these different activities are postdocs, compared to PhD students and faculty. Interestingly, when we look at our data for Mendeley, we asked about different activities. I'll tell you about that in a moment. But when you look at the group that most uses Mendeley, for Mendeley, it's the PhD students. So there might really be a generational effect there. And since Mendeley started as a reference management tool and has a lot of functionalities related to that, we asked for Mendeley for a few different research activities compared to ResearchGate. And we see that of the ones we asked about, most people say they use Mendeley for reference management, followed by reading, searching, and getting alerts, recommendations. So these are the ones we specifically asked people about. But what other activities did people volunteer they use ResearchGate for, or Mendeley for, or academia for? Jeroen already showed you this one. This is the same one shown earlier with all the possible different activities that you can use the social networks for. And when we checked in all the other answers that people gave, which activities at least some people indicate they use each of these networks for, it's really across the board. Almost everything, every functionality is used by people. And two interesting things to point out, that in sharing research output, almost irregardless of what a platform facilitates for sharing, whether they have specific formats for sharing posters or not, people share anything on them. Publications, posters, data. And in the analysis phase also, people do share their notebooks and their protocols. And even indicate using Mendeley for analysis. And we really want to talk to those people to see what they do in analysis. So I want to dive in a little bit deeper about two of these activities to compare use of ResearchGate and academia and Mendeley with use of other tools for that activity. And the first one is archiving and sharing publications, where, again, ResearchGate comes out on top, well above institutional repositories, which come in second, and also others come in third here. And when you look into those, the one that comes on top there is academia.edu. So we didn't ask for academia in one of the preset options, but people do massively indicate they use that too. And then the disciplinary repositories, PubMed Central, Archive, SON, come out lower. That's, of course, also because they are disciplinary. If you break this down by discipline, the distribution will look differently. So this is archiving and sharing publication. The other side, getting access to publication. There, institutional access comes out on top of the researchers. This, again, is all for the researchers. People massively still use institutional access, but again, ResearchGate comes in second. A lot of people also use ResearchGate. Now, one of them is obviously missing here. We didn't put it in as a preset option. Not many people volunteered they use SciHub, but I still want to talk about that for a moment. Because we did look, not related to one-on-one innovations, but we did look a little bit more into SciHub. When John Bohannon released the SciHub download data last year, I looked at our Dutch university towns and how many downloads are coming from our Dutch university towns. Of course, there are all kinds of caveats with IP geolocation, how reliable those data are. And for instance, you see, if you know the Netherlands, which I know a lot of you do, there's one big missing, Amsterdam. Amsterdam has about 30 times more downloads than any other town in the Netherlands. And it doesn't mean that the two universities in Amsterdam are massive SciHub users. It's probably because Amsterdam is a major ISP hub. So a lot of traffic goes to Amsterdam and is geolocated to Amsterdam. So I left Amsterdam out. I was most interested in our own university, so I looked at the downloads from U-Tracts, which again, we don't know how many of those come from institutional users. We can make an estimation, at least 10%, but we really don't know how many these are. But I was interested, if people download those, suppose they are from our university, to how much of that download, that corpus, do they have access to our institutional subscriptions? So the availability to publishers, I'll go quickly. About 15% is gold open access, and about 60% is available through our subscriptions. So that people go to Sci-Hub regardless might say something about user-friendliness of our user interfaces, both of the publishers and of us as a library. When we look at green and gold open access, so we're looking from the perspective of not university-affiliated people, together that's only about 25–30% that's accessible, and over 70% is not accessible. So as a scientific community, we really should do more about making stuff accessible. So we talk a lot about use of individual tools for activities. But when you look at the research workflow, tools being used together, these tools are not used in isolation. They're used together. And a couple of ways you can look at it, and a couple of things that are important. And Jeroen will take over.
Well, here you see that these tools are really being used together, and this is indicating really data flows or things being linked to each other in practice. Another way of looking at that is, and that is based on our survey, is see what kind of tools are used more than you should expect based on their individual tool used levels, used together. And we do have this available online as well, tinyurl.com, tool combinations. So you can select a tool and see, is this tool used together with other tools? And you see that academia is being used together with other tools than ResearchGate. So they really differ. You see, for instance, that looking at archiving and sharing, academia is used more than you should expect with Archive, with PubMed Central, sorry, less than you expect with Archive and PubMed Central, and more with institutional repositories. That is over there. If you look at ResearchGate, you see that it is less used than expected with Archive, with institutional repositories, with bioRxiv, with working papers. And that's probably because people do things within ResearchGate and not using the other options that are available for that. But the big question, of course, is what does all this tell us? What should we learn? What should we learn from this? And here we move into values and value added. I think regarding values, these are important values. They have been developed at Force 11, which is a group that brings communities together to think about scholarly communication. So scholarly communication should be equitable, open, sustainable, and research and culture-led, as opposed to technology or business model-led. So I think it's important for us as publishers, but also as libraries, as institutions, to think about this. What kind of scholarly communication system do we want? And again, to have an idea of where we could move, it's interesting to look at some of the other tools that are in some ways comparable in the sense that they also serve multiple phases of the research workflow. For instance, Open Science Framework. Or F1000, that does have a very broad set of tools for researchers, although especially in life science and medicine, of course. Or Science Open, that just yesterday launched their revamped platform, which is very nice, and which is also serving all kinds of things that researchers want to do. Or look at the recently launched Humanities Commons. It's only humanities, but that might be a competitor, for instance, for academia, and perhaps more trusted by that community. Or another one, a big one, it's not a new kid on the block, it has been there for decades, almost decades, is GitHub. You can do almost anything there, and you see researchers moving there, even publishing in GitHub, sharing ideas, putting papers up on GitHub, doing project management there, etc. And we can look not only at what functions do they have, but also what kind of idea is behind those companies, those initiatives, on how scholarly communication should function. And here I move back to Bianca again.
Yeah. And to end this talk, we want to present some of our thinking about developments that are at play currently, stimulating or inhibiting good, efficient, and open research, enabling researchers to work in a good, open, and efficient way. And on top, things that are slowing it down from discussion with researchers, from discussion with funders, is debunking the impact factor myth thinking. Still stuck in that. Debunking data scooping myth. How often does it really happen that people are scooped? Everyone's so afraid of it. How often does it really happen? Changing the version of record thinking with persistent identifiers and with good infrastructure. It should not be necessary to have one version of record anymore, as long as you can persistently link to the versions that are out there. Things that are making this transition easier, making it go smooth, is the preprint adoption by publishers and researchers. We see a lot of preprint servers popping up at the moment. We see a lot of publishers encouraging even, enabling and encouraging preprint deposition. NIH thinking about that, moving in that direction. Data management policies that are increasingly required by funders. And only yesterday, Springer Nature announced data sharing policies for a slew of their journals. And ORCID adoption is also really on the increase with researchers, funders, publishers. And those things make good, open, and efficient research really easier. Because in the end, it's about enabling researchers to do their work. And when we asked researchers in our survey, what do they think is the most important development in scholarly communication? This is one thing that they said. Finding more effective ways to share and disseminate progress made on a daily basis, so really quick, really fast, without delays, anywhere in the world. Not limited to the Western world, to people who can afford it, not limited to your own circle of researchers, but really across the world and for society. And let's make that happen. Thank you very much.